The heavy iron gates of Pine Hollow Psychiatric Hospital creaked ominously as I drove through, a chill creeping down my spine. It was my first day as a psychiatrist here, and despite the anxious fluttering in my stomach, I was determined to prove myself. Pine Hollow was known for its strict policies and a few infamous stories that kept the local townsfolk whispering about the place. But those were just stories, right? I brushed off the thoughts as I parked my car and stepped out, the crisp autumn air biting at my skin. The sprawling building loomed before me, its Gothic architecture a stark contrast to the vibrant foliage surrounding it. As I walked up the cracked pathway, I glanced at the warning signs. Restricted area, no unauthorized personnel. I could feel the weight of the hospital's history bearing down on me, a mixture of dread and excitement swirling in my chest. Dr. Sullivan, the psychiatrist I was replacing, had left me a series of rules, a handwritten note tucked into my welcome packet. "Follow these rules," it said, "and you'll be fine." The vague warning unsettled me, but I pushed it aside as I entered the hospital. Inside, the reception area was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. A nurse greeted me with a tight-lipped smile, her eyes darting nervously. "You must be Dr. Ellis. Welcome. We've been expecting you." She handed me a clipboard filled with paperwork, and as I filled it out, she glanced toward the door, as if she were waiting for something or someone. "Is everything all right?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Just keep an eye on the patients. They can be unpredictable." With that cryptic comment, she hurried off to attend to other tasks, leaving me feeling more isolated than before. Once I finished the paperwork, I was led to my office. The room was small and sparsely decorated, with a desk, a couple of chairs, and a large window that looked out onto the ward. I took a deep breath and sat down, opening the note from Dr. Sullivan. 1. Don't make eye contact with the patients. 2. Never enter the seclusion room alone. 3. Keep the door to your office locked at all times. 4. If you hear whispering in the halls, ignore it. 5. Trust no one. The last rule sent a shiver down my spine. What had happened to Dr. Sullivan? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about this place. I decided to explore the ward, hoping to familiarize myself with my new environment. As I walked down the stark white hallways, I passed several rooms, each with heavy metal doors and small windows. I peered inside and saw patients in various states of distress. Some rocked back and forth in their chairs, while others stared blankly at the walls. A few looked up at me with wide, pleading eyes. I quickly averted my gaze, recalling the first rule. I could feel their desperation clawing at my insides, a silent call for help that made my heart ache. In the common area, I met a few nurses and support staff. They exchanged wary glances as I introduced myself. "I'm Dr. Ellis, the new psychiatrist," I said, trying to sound confident. "Good luck," one nurse muttered under her breath, her eyes flickering toward the exit. "Just be careful with them," another nurse added, her voice low and serious. "They can sense fear. And once they know you're afraid." She left the sentence hanging ominously in the air. As I made my way back to my office, I could feel the weight of the ward pressing in on me. The whispers in the halls began to grow louder, the voices melding into a haunting melody that echoed in my mind. I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. I needed to focus on my work, not get lost in the unsettling atmosphere. That afternoon, I had my first therapy session with a patient named Alex, a young man in his 20s who had been admitted after a severe breakdown. He was quiet and withdrawn, sitting in the chair across from me with his hands folded in his lap. His eyes flickered nervously around the room, avoiding mine. "Alex," I said gently, "I'm here to help you. Can you tell me what brought you here?" He looked down, his voice barely above a whisper. I can't talk about it." "Why not?" I probed, trying to build trust. "It's a safe space." He swallowed hard, his gaze darting toward the door. "They'll hear you. They'll know." I frowned, confused. "Who will hear me?" "The others. They watch, they listen." His voice trembled, and I could see the fear etched across his face. "Alex, who are you afraid of?" I asked, leaning forward. He shook his head violently, tears streaming down his cheeks. "I can't say. They'll come for me." Suddenly, there was a loud bang from the hallway, causing Alex to jump in his seat. I glanced toward the door, my heart racing. "Stay here," I instructed, my instinct kicking in. I stepped out into the hallway, trying to find the source of the noise. As I moved through the dimly lit corridor, I felt an unsettling energy pulsing around me. The whispers intensified, filling my ears with disjointed phrases, fragments of conversations, and cries for help. I strained to listen, trying to make sense of it all. "Help me, she's coming. Don't let her in. Stay away from the seclusion room." I shook my head, trying to dispel the thoughts. This was just my imagination running wild. I turned a corner and found a group of nurses clustered around a patient in distress. They were trying to calm him down, but he was thrashing wildly, screaming incoherently. "What happened?" I asked, rushing over. "He had a bad episode," one nurse replied, her face pale. "We're trying to sedate him, but he's too strong." I stepped back, feeling the fear seep into my bones. The chaos of the ward was overwhelming, and I could feel the anxiety radiating from the staff. "Is he going to be okay?" "We'll manage," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. As I returned to my office, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong at Pine Hollow. The rules Dr. Sullivan had left me echoed in my mind, each one a reminder of the dangers lurking within these walls. That evening, I reviewed my notes and the patients I would be seeing the next day, but the whispers never ceased. They haunted the corners of my mind, drawing me deeper into the hospital's dark history. As the sun set, casting long shadows in my office, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, a loud knock on my door startled me. I quickly stood and opened it to find a nurse standing there, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Dr. Ellis, you need to come with me," she said urgently. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart racing. "It's Alex. He's gone." "Gone?" I repeated, confusion washing over me. "What do you mean?" "He escaped from his room. We think he's in the seclusion room." My stomach dropped. The seclusion room was a solitary confinement area meant for the most dangerous patients. The thought of Alex being in there, possibly facing whatever he feared most, sent a chill through me. "Let's go," I said, following her down the corridor. As we approached the seclusion room, the air grew colder and the whispers became frantic. I could hear them clearly now, the words wrapping around me like a suffocating blanket. "Don't go in. She's waiting." The nurse glanced at me, her eyes filled with fear. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I nodded, steeling myself. "We have to find him." The heavy door to the seclusion room loomed before us, its surface scratched and worn. The nurse opened it cautiously, and we stepped inside. The dim light flickered, casting eerie shadows against the walls. "Alex," I called, my voice echoing in the small room. "Are you here?" There was no response, only the sound of my heart pounding in my chest. I stepped further inside, scanning the room for any sign of him. The only furniture was a narrow bed and a single metal chair, bolted to the floor, but the room was empty. "What the hell?" I muttered, turning to the nurse. "Where could he have gone?" Before she could answer, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening bang. I jumped, panic rising within me. "Open the door," I shouted, rushing toward it. The nurse pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. "It's locked," she cried, fear flooding her voice. "Stay calm," I said, trying to keep my composure. I turned back to the room, desperately searching for another way out. That's when I noticed something on the floor, a series of strange symbols drawn in the dust, a circle encircling a figure. "What is that?" the nurse whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I replied, kneeling down to examine the symbols, "but it looks like some sort of ritual." The whispers intensified, swirling around us like a tempest. I could feel a presence in the room, something dark and malevolent. It filled my lungs, making it hard to breathe. "Dr. Ellis," the nurse said softly, her eyes widening. "Look." I followed her gaze to the corner of the room where a figure stood shrouded in shadows. It was indistinct, almost human, but it radiated an aura of pure malice. "Get back," I yelled, grabbing the nurse's arm and pulling her away. But the figure moved closer, its features becoming clearer. A woman, her face twisted in anguish. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing in my mind. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. "What is this?" I gasped, panic threatening to overwhelm me. "What do you want?" "Help," the woman moaned, her eyes filled with sorrow. "They won't let me go." "Who?" I shouted, feeling the room constrict around me. But before she could answer, the whispers erupted into a cacophony of sound, drowning out her voice. "Get out, get out," they screamed. The room shook violently, and I clutched the nurse's arm, trying to steady myself. "We need to find a way out," I shouted over the chaos. With a burst of adrenaline, I charged toward the door, slamming my shoulder against it. It wouldn't budge. The energy in the room was suffocating, pressing down on me as if the walls themselves were alive, closing in. "Help," I cried, desperation clawing at my throat. "Someone, help us." Just then, the door flew open, and a group of orderlies rushed in, their expressions a mix of confusion and fear. They pulled us from the room and slammed the door shut behind us, locking it tightly. "Are you okay?" one of the orderlies asked, concern etched on his face. I nodded, but my mind was racing. What just happened in there? We saw something. The nurse looked at me, her face pale. "We need to tell someone. This isn't right." After the incident in the seclusion room, I spent the next few days on edge. The whispers lingered in the back of my mind, and I could feel the oppressive energy of the hospital weighing heavily on my shoulders. I tried to focus on my patients, but I found it increasingly difficult. Alex was still missing, and the staff had become tight-lipped about his whereabouts. Rumors circulated about his fate, but no one seemed willing to speak openly. The atmosphere was thick with fear and paranoia, and I felt as though I were standing on the precipice of something dark and unknown. One night, I was reviewing patient files in my office when I heard a soft knock at the door. I looked up to see the nurse from before, her face drawn and anxious. "Dr. Ellis, I think we need to talk," she said, glancing nervously down the hallway. "About what?" I asked, my stomach twisting in knots. "About Alex and the other patients. I think there's something wrong with this place, something we're not seeing." I gestured for her to sit down, my curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, then leaned in closer. "There's a history here, a dark one. Patients have gone missing over the years, and no one talks about it. I found some old records in the archives. They're disturbing." "Disturbing how?" I pressed, feeling a sense of dread settle in my gut. "Patients who disappeared without a trace, strange symbols found in their rooms, and the whispers, people have reported hearing them for decades. They say it's the spirits of the lost, trapped in the hospital." I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing. "Spirits? Are you serious?" "I know it sounds crazy, but there's something here, something that feeds off fear and despair." She looked into my eyes, her expression grave. "And I think it's coming for us." As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in Pine Hollow became increasingly oppressive. The whispers grew louder, echoing in my mind even when I was alone. I tried to stay focused on my work, but I could feel the weight of the hospital's dark history pressing down on me. One night, I was called to the ward to assist with a patient who had become agitated. As I entered the room, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. The patient, a woman named Sarah, was screaming and thrashing in her bed, her eyes wild with terror. "Help me, they're coming for me," she shrieked, her voice raw and panicked. "Sarah, it's okay, you're safe," I said, trying to soothe her. "What's happening?" "They're here," she wailed, pointing toward the corner of the room. "I can see them. They're watching." I turned to look, but there was nothing there. "Sarah, there's no one here," I said, my heart racing. "No, they're here. They're everywhere," she screamed, her body convulsing with fear. I felt the whispers surge around me, swirling in a chaotic dance of sound. "Help us. Don't let her go," they pleaded, and I could sense their desperation clawing at my mind. In that moment, I realized that the hospital was not just a place of healing, it was a prison for the lost, the forgotten, and the damned. The shadows that lurked in the corners were the remnants of their despair, echoing through the halls like a haunting melody. After the incident with Sarah, I could no longer ignore the growing sense of dread. I confided in the nurse about my experiences, and together we decided to investigate the hospital's history further. We spent hours in the archives, sifting through old records and documents. What we uncovered was chilling. Stories of experimental treatments, patients who had vanished without explanation, and strange occurrences that plagued the hospital for decades. "There's a pattern," I said, my voice trembling with realization. "Each time a patient goes missing, the whispers intensify." The nurse nodded, her expression grave. "It's as if they're feeding off the fear and despair of those left behind." As we delved deeper into the records, we stumbled upon an old photograph, a group of doctors standing outside the hospital in the 1960s. One of them looked strikingly familiar. "Is that Dr. Sullivan?" the nurse asked, pointing to the figure. I squinted at the photograph, my heart racing. "It can't be, but it looks just like him." "Maybe he was trying to warn you," she suggested. "He must have known something." The more we uncovered, the more I realized that Dr. Sullivan had left me a warning, not just a list of rules. He had known the dangers that lurked within Pine Hollow, and now it was my turn to confront them. Armed with newfound knowledge, I decided to confront the shadows that haunted the hospital. That night, I gathered a small group of nurses and orderlies, sharing our findings and the escalating danger we faced. "We need to face whatever is happening here," I said, my voice steady. "We can't let it continue to prey on our patients or ourselves." The nurses exchanged wary glances, but they nodded in agreement. "We have to take a stand," one of them said. "If we don't, it will only get worse." With our resolve strengthened, we prepared to confront the dark energy that permeated the hospital. Armed with flashlights and our collective courage, we made our way to the seclusion room once more. As we entered, the air felt charged, electric with anticipation. The whispers echoed around us, a chorus of desperate voices. "Help us, don't let her go." We formed a circle in the center of the room, focusing our energy and intent. "We're here to confront the darkness," I said, my voice strong. "We won't let fear control us." Suddenly, the shadows coalesced into a figure, a woman, her face twisted with anguish. "You cannot stop me," she hissed, her voice echoing through the room. "Why are you here?" I demanded, my heart pounding. "What do you want?" "I seek vengeance," she spat, her eyes blazing with fury. "They took my life, and now I will take theirs." The room erupted in chaos as the figure lunged toward us, her dark energy swirling like a storm. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, drowning out my thoughts. I could feel the fear radiating from my colleagues, and I fought to keep my own fear at bay. "Stand strong," I shouted, trying to rally everyone's courage. "We can't let her control us." With a surge of determination, I reached out, focusing on the energy around us. "You are not welcome here," I cried, channeling my strength against the darkness. The figure faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features. "You think you can stop me," she sneered, but there was a tremor in her voice. "We will not be your victims," I declared, my voice rising above the chaos. Together, we pushed back against the darkness, forming a barrier of light around us. The whispers began to fade, replaced by a chorus of defiance. "Leave this place," we shouted in unison, our voices echoing with power. The figure screamed, her form disintegrating into shadows. The air grew still, and for a moment we stood in silence, the weight of our actions settling over us. The following days were eerily calm. The whispers had faded, and the oppressive energy that had once suffocated the hospital seemed to lift. Patients reported feeling lighter, as if a weight had been removed from their spirits. I found myself feeling cautiously optimistic. Perhaps we had succeeded in confronting the darkness that had plagued Pine Hollow for so long. But as I sat in my office, reviewing patient files, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't truly over. One evening, as I prepared to leave, I heard a soft knock at my door. I looked up to see the nurse standing there, her expression troubled. "Dr. Ellis, I think you should see this," she said, handing me a file. I opened it to find a series of new admissions, patients with similar symptoms to those I had seen before. Each one had reported hearing whispers, feeling watched, and experiencing vivid nightmares. "We thought we had stopped it," I said, disbelief creeping into my voice. "Maybe it's not over yet," the nurse replied, her eyes wide with concern. "We need to stay vigilant." As the days turned into weeks, the whispers began to resurface, softer at first, but gradually growing louder. I could feel the anxiety creeping back into the hospital, and my heart sank as I realized that the darkness we had confronted was far from vanquished. One night, I was jolted awake by a piercing scream echoing through the halls. I rushed out of my office, heart racing, and followed the sound to one of the patient rooms. Inside, a woman named Emily thrashed in her bed, her eyes wide with terror. "They're here. They're coming," she screamed, her voice raw with panic. "Emily, it's okay," I said, trying to calm her down. "You're safe here." "No, they're watching me. They won't let me go," she cried, pointing toward the corner of the room. I glanced over, but there was nothing there, yet the air felt charged, thick with an unshakable presence. "Help me," she begged, her voice breaking. "We need to get her some medication," I said to the nurses rushing in. But as they administered the sedative, I felt a wave of dread wash over me. The whispers grew louder, echoing through my mind. "She belongs to us." The following days were a blur of chaos as more patients began to exhibit signs of distress. The whispers escalated into frantic cries, and I could feel the hospital slipping further into despair. I knew we had to take action. Gathering the staff once more, I proposed a plan. We need to confront this darkness again, but this time, we need to go deeper. We need to uncover the root of it all. The nurses and orderlies exchanged worried glances, but they agreed. We returned to the archives, searching for any clues that might lead us to the source of the darkness that plagued Pine Hollow. As we sifted through the old records, we discovered a hidden file, a journal belonging to one of the early doctors who had worked at the hospital. The entries revealed harrowing accounts of experiments conducted on patients aimed at tapping into the human psyche in search of the soul. "There's something here," I said, my heart racing as I read through the pages. They were trying to harness the power of fear. "But why?" one of the nurses asked, her brow furrowed with confusion. "To control it," I replied, piecing together the fragments of the past. They thought they could contain it, but they only unleashed it. Armed with newfound knowledge, we prepared for one final confrontation. We gathered in the seclusion room, the air heavy with tension. The whispers surged around us, a chorus of agony and despair. "We're here to confront you," I shouted, my voice echoing through the darkness. "Show yourself." The shadows coalesced once more, forming the twisted figure of the woman we had faced before. "You cannot stop me," she hissed, her voice laced with fury. "You are weak." "We are not weak," I cried, my voice rising above the chaos. "We are stronger than you." With a surge of determination, we formed a circle around the figure, channeling our collective energy. The whispers became a powerful force, pushing back against the darkness. "I won't let you control us," I shouted, my heart racing as I focused on the light within me. The figure screamed, thrashing against our energy, but we held our ground. "You will not take our souls," we shouted in unison, our voices ringing with defiance. With one final surge of energy, we pushed against the darkness, and the figure dissolved into shadows, the whispers fading into silence. The air grew still, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. "We did it," one of the nurses breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Yes," I replied, tears of relief streaming down my face. "We faced the darkness together, and we won." As we emerged from the seclusion room, the atmosphere in Pine Hollow felt lighter. Patients began to show signs of improvement. Their spirits lifted as the weight of fear was lifted from their hearts. But I knew that our victory was only temporary. The darkness would always exist, lurking in the shadows, waiting for a moment of weakness. Pine Hollow would never truly be free from its past, but we had confronted it head on, and for now, that was enough. Months passed, and I continued my work at Pine Hollow, determined to support my patients and prevent the darkness from returning. The whispers had faded, but I knew they could resurface at any moment. One night, as I was leaving the hospital, I caught a glimpse of the old photograph of the doctors hanging on the wall. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized something. The figure that resembled Dr. Sullivan was not just a coincidence. He had been a part of the darkness that had consumed Pine Hollow. I vowed to continue my fight against the shadows, to honor the lives lost within these walls. I would not let fear dictate our future. As I drove away from the hospital, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure watching me from the shadows. But there was nothing, only the darkness of the night and the faint echoes of the past lingering in the air. Pine Hollow was a place of healing, but it would always bear the scars of its history. I could only hope that the echoes of the lost would find peace, and that we would remain vigilant against the darkness that would forever lurk just beyond the light.